The silk tore with a sound like breaking bones. I felt it before I heard it, the deliberate yank at my hemline, the calculated cruelty disguised as an accident in the crush of bodies moving toward the ceremonial hall. Cold air kissed my exposed thigh, and I knew without looking that the damage was catastrophic. The pale blue fabric, the only decent dress I owned, hung in ruined strips from my waist down. Laughter. Soft and vicious, barely masked by the swell of orchestral music, drifting from the grand doors ahead. "Oh no." Sienna's voice dripped false concern behind me. "How clumsy of you, cousin. Perhaps you should have been more careful." I didn't turn around. I'd learned years ago that meeting their eyes only fed their hunger for my humiliation. Instead, I pressed my palm against the stone wall of the corridor, steadying myself as heat flooded my cheeks. Around us, other families moved in glittering processions toward the selection ceremony. Daughters in jewel-toned gowns, sons in tailored suits, all of them belonging to the world I'd never quite fit into. My father had been a low-born wolf who'd married into the Ashford line. When he died defending the northern borders, my mother followed him within a year, her heart simply stopping. I was 7. The family took me in because they had to, because bloodlines still mattered in our world, but they made sure I knew the difference between obligation and welcome. "You really thought you'd be chosen looking like that?" That was Vivian, Sienna's sister, her perfectly curled blonde hair, so much darker and richer than my pale ash blonde, catching the lamplight. The Lycan king is looking for a mate worthy of standing beside him, not some charity case in a thrift store dress. The dress hadn't come from a thrift store. I'd sewn it myself over 3 months of late nights, my fingers cramping around the needle, trying to create something beautiful from the limited fabric I could afford on my seamstress wages. The Ashfords gave me a roof and barely enough food to survive. Everything else, I earned. "We should go," Sienna said, louder now, her voice carrying to the other families pausing to observe the spectacle. "Come along, Vivian. We don't want to be late because of unfortunate delays." They swept past me in a cloud of expensive perfume, jasmine and rose, scents I sometimes smelled on my own skin after laundering their clothes. I watched them go, these cousins who'd shared my childhood but never my burdens, who'd had everything handed to them while I'd fought for scraps. The corridor was emptying. In minutes, the ceremony would begin. I looked down at my ruined dress. The tear ran from mid-thigh to ankle, exposing not just skin but the obvious poverty of my undergarments, the mended stockings, the desperation of someone who'd hoped, foolishly, that tonight might be different. My throat tightened. I would not cry. Not here, where anyone might see. Not over this. But I also couldn't walk into that hall. The selection ceremony happened once in a generation, when a Lycan king reached maturity and called for potential mates from every wolf family in the kingdom. It was ritual, politics, and theater combined, a display of our finest, our strongest, our most beautiful. Attendance was mandatory for all unmated wolves between 18 and 25. Absence meant disgrace, not just for the individual, but for their entire family line. The Ashfords would blame me. They always did. If I didn't appear, they'd say I'd sabotaged them deliberately, embarrassed them before the king. Never mind that their own daughters had ensured my humiliation. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to think past the panic rising in my chest. There had to be a solution. I could... What? Tear the dress further, make it look intentional, pin it somehow with the small brooch I'd tucked into my bodice, my only piece of jewelry, a simple silver thing I'd bought myself. "The doors are closing." The voice came from an older wolf I didn't recognize, a dignified woman in forest green who glanced at me with something that might have been pity before continuing into the hall. The massive oak doors were indeed swinging shut, operated by royal guards in midnight blue uniforms. I had seconds. My legs moved before my mind caught up. I gathered what remained of my skirt in both fists, holding the ruined fabric together as best I could, and hurried toward the entrance. The guards didn't stop me. I was clearly marked as a selection participant by the blue ribbon tied around my wrist, but I felt their eyes on my humiliation as I slipped through the narrowing gap. The ceremonial hall stole my breath despite everything. I'd never been inside the king's palace before. Few low-born wolves had. The space soared 3 stories high, all dark wood and stone, with iron chandeliers holding hundreds of candles that cast dancing shadows across the assembled crowd. Tapestries depicting legendary battles hung between tall windows, and the air smelled of beeswax, pine, and something else, something wild and dangerous that made my wolf stir restlessly inside me. Power. Ancient and absolute. The crowd had arranged itself in a semicircle around a raised dais at the hall's far end. I could see the back of the throne, massive and carved from a single piece of black oak, but not who sat upon it. Hundreds of wolves filled the space. Families clustered together, the wealthy near the front in their finery, the rest of us scattered toward the back and sides. I tried to slip into the shadows along the wall, to make myself invisible as I'd perfected over the years. But the movement of my entry had drawn eyes. Whispers rippled through the nearest groups. A girl my age, someone I vaguely recognized from market days, pointed and covered her mouth. Her mother's lips pursed in disapproval. Somewhere ahead, I heard Sienna's distinctive laugh. My face burned. I focused on breathing, in through my nose, out through my mouth, and keeping my torn skirt gathered as tightly as possible. Maybe if I stood very still, if I made no sound, people would forget I existed. It had worked before. Invisibility was my only reliable defense. The king will now address the selection. The voice boomed through the hall, amplified somehow, and silence fell like an executioner's blade. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd seen King Rowan exactly once before, 3 years ago, when he'd ridden through our territory on some official business. I'd been in the market, and even from a distance, even in the chaos of a crowd, his presence had been undeniable. Tall, dark-haired, moving with the controlled grace of a predator who knew nothing could challenge him. They said he was the strongest Lycan born in 5 centuries, that he'd killed his first rogue wolf at 14, that his eyes could see through lies, and his voice could compel obedience from even the most dominant alphas. They also said he was cold, merciless, alone by choice, because no one could match his strength, and he refused to settle for weakness. Footsteps echoed across the stone floor, deliberate, measured, commanding attention. Then he appeared, stepping around the throne to face us, and the air itself seemed to thicken. King Rowan was taller than I remembered, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of brutal training and actual combat. His hair was indeed dark, black as midnight, and long enough to brush his collar, but it was his face that captured and held. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that looked like they'd forgotten how to smile, and his eyes. Even from this distance, I could see they were unusual, not the amber or gold of most Lycans, but a pale, crystalline gray that seemed to cut through shadows. He wore black. All black. No ornamentation, no crown, no jewelry. He didn't need any of it. "I am not here to perform a pageant," he said, and his voice carried that same quality I'd heard in the announcement, something that resonated in the chest, in the bones. "I am here because tradition demands it, and I respect the foundations of our society. But make no mistake about my purpose." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled wolves with the cold efficiency of a predator assessing prey. "I am looking for a mate who can stand beside me, not behind me, not in my shadow. Someone with strength, intelligence, and courage. Someone who understands that being queen means sharing the burden of leadership, not simply wearing a title." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the typical selection speech. Usually King spoke of beauty and grace, of companionship and producing heirs. King Rowan sounded like he was recruiting for a military position. "You will be observed over the next hour," he continued. "How you carry yourselves, how you interact with others, whether you show kindness or cruelty when you think no one of importance is watching." His eyes moved across the room again, and I could have sworn they lingered for just a heartbeat on the section where I stood half hidden in shadow, my ruined dress clutched in trembling fists. "At the end of this ceremony, I will make my choice. There will be no courtship period, no negotiations. The female I select will become my mate and your future queen. If you cannot accept these terms, you may leave now without shame." No one moved. Of course no one moved. To leave would be to reject the king, to mark yourself as defiant or cowardly. Even those who had no real chance of being chosen, like me. wouldn't dare. "Then we begin," King Rowan said, and stepped down from the dais. The ceremony transformed into something like a predator's hunt. The king moved through the crowd, and wherever he went, wolves pressed close, families angling their daughters forward, young females preening and post-posing, everyone desperately trying to capture his attention. I watched Sienna and Vivienne practically throw themselves into his path, their practiced smiles bright and hungry. I stayed against the wall, forgotten, relieved to be forgotten. But as the minutes passed and King Rowan continued his circuit of the hall, something strange began to happen. He didn't seem engaged. He spoke politely when addressed, listened with apparent patience to the carefully rehearsed introductions, but his expression remained distant, empty, as if he was going through motions he'd long since stopped believing in. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in my own reflection often enough. The face you showed the world when you'd learned that hoping only led to disappointment. He was lonely. The thought struck me with startling clarity. This powerful king, surrounded by hundreds of wolves desperate for his attention, was profoundly and utterly alone. "You there?" The voice made me jump. I looked up to find an older man in royal livery, some kind of palace official, staring at me with barely concealed disgust. "You're blocking the servants' entrance," he hissed, gesturing to a small door behind me I hadn't even noticed. "And what happened to your dress? You look like you crawled through brambles." More heads were turning now. I felt the weight of their attention, their judgment. It was an accident," I managed, hating how small my voice sounded. "An accident." The official's lip curled. "You show such disrespect at a royal ceremony? Perhaps you should— Is there a problem here?" The temperature in my corner of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. King Rowan stood 3 feet away, his pale eyes fixed not on me, but on the official, who'd gone absolutely white. I hadn't heard the king approach. No one had. He'd simply appeared, like a ghost, like a nightmare. "Your Majesty, I was simply— this girl, her dress." The official stammered, his earlier authority evaporating. "I asked if there was a problem," King Rowan repeated, his voice softer now, but somehow more dangerous. "Not for excuses. No, Your Majesty. No problem." "Good." The king dismissed him with a glance, and the man practically fled. Then those pale gray eyes turned to me, and I couldn't breathe. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. Taller, broader, his presence a physical weight that made my wolf whimper and press herself low. This close, I could see the faint scars on his jaw, the exhaustion carefully hidden behind his controlled expression, the way his nostrils flared slightly as he scented me. His gaze dropped to my ruined dress, to my hands still clutching the torn fabric, to the obvious poverty and humiliation written across every aspect of my appearance. I waited for the dismissal, the disgust, the turning away that I'd experienced so many times before. Instead, King Rowan reached up and unclasped the heavy cloak from his shoulders. The crowd gasped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the hall fixed on us, on me, as the king of all Lycan stepped closer, and with surprising gentleness, draped his royal cloak around my trembling form. It was massive, designed for his frame, and it swallowed me entirely. The fabric was thick wool lined with silk, and it smelled like winter forests and wood smoke, and something uniquely him. The weight of it settled over my shoulders like armor, like protection, like a promise. "Better," he said quietly, his voice pitched only for me. I stared up at him, completely unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Kings didn't notice girls like me, let alone offer them their cloaks in front of the entire court. "What's your name?" he asked. My mouth felt full of cotton. "Elena, Your Majesty. Elena Ashford." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. Ashford. I know that family. Wealthy. Connected. His gaze moved pointedly to my dress beneath his cloak. Apparently not generous. Heat flooded my face again, but this time it wasn't entirely shame. There was anger there, too. Anger that he could see it. That my humiliation was so obvious that I couldn't even pretend to belong. "It was an accident," I heard myself say, echoing my earlier words but with more strength now. "The tear. Just bad luck." King Rowan studied me for a long moment. Then, impossibly, his lips curved. Not quite a smile, but something almost like approval. Loyalty, he said, even to those who don't deserve it. Interesting. He stepped back, and I thought he would leave, would return to his search for a proper mate among the jeweled and perfect females watching us with barely contained fury. Instead, he raised his voice to address the room. The ceremony is concluded. I have made my choice. Chaos erupted. Voices rose in confusion, in protest, in shock. I saw Sienna's face twist with rage, saw families pressing forward demanding explanations. King Rowan ignored them all. He looked only at me, his pale eyes holding mine with an intensity that made the world narrow to just the space between us. "Elena Ashford," he said, his voice carrying over the noise, commanding silence through sheer force of will. "By the ancient laws of selection and the authority vested in me as king, I claim you as my chosen mate." The room spun. My knees weakened. This wasn't possible. This wasn't... "Do you accept?" he asked, softer now, and I realized with a jolt that despite all his power, despite having just announced his choice before the entire court, he was actually asking, giving me a choice. I thought of the life I'd lived, the cold bedroom in my relative's house, the endless labor, the loneliness that had become as familiar as breathing. I thought of Sienna and Vivienne, who would be apoplectic with rage. I thought of all the ways this decision could destroy me if I was wrong about the brief glimpse of understanding I'd seen in his eyes. But I also thought of that moment of recognition, of the cloak around my shoulders, still warm from his body, of the way he'd defended me without hesitation from someone who'd been nothing but cruel. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder, my voice finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "Yes, Your Majesty, I accept." King Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flash of what might have been relief, or triumph, or simple satisfaction. He offered me his arm. "Then come, my queen. We have much to discuss." I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric of his shirt, and let him lead me through the stunned crowd. Behind us, I heard shouting, protests, my aunt's shrill voice demanding an explanation. But King Rowan didn't stop, didn't acknowledge any of it. The massive oak doors swung open before us, and we stepped out into the cool night air. My life as Elena Ashford, the forgotten cousin, the invisible girl, was over. What came next? I had no idea. But for the first time in years, walking beside this dangerous, lonely king with his cloak wrapped around me like a shield, I felt something dangerous bloom in my chest. Hope. The king's private chambers were nothing like I'd imagined. I'd expected opulence, gold leaf and velvet, the trappings of power displayed like trophies. Instead, the room he led me to was almost Spartan. Dark wood furniture, a massive stone fireplace where flames crackled and popped, thick rugs that muffled our footsteps. The walls held weapons, not artwork, swords and daggers arranged with a collector's care, each one looking used, functional, deadly. It felt more like a soldier's quarters than a palace. "You can remove the cloak now," King Rowan said, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters caught the firelight. "We're alone. No one to see." I clutched the fabric tighter, suddenly aware of the ruined dress beneath. "I'd rather not, if it's all the same to you, Your Majesty." He glanced back at me, and for the first time, I saw something almost like amusement flicker across his features. "Rowan. When we're alone, you'll call me Rowan." He poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. "And I'm offering you privacy to change, not asking you to stand here exposed." He gestured to a door I hadn't noticed. "There's a bathing room through there. You'll find clothing that should fit." I had my staff prepare several options when I knew the selection was tonight. He paused, studying me with those unsettling pale eyes. I wasn't certain I'd choose anyone, but I wanted to be prepared for possibilities. "You knew you'd choose me?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Before you even saw me?" "No." He crossed the room, offering me one of the glasses. When I hesitated, he added, "It's just whiskey, Elena. I'm not trying to poison my newly chosen mate hours after claiming her. That would be remarkably poor strategy." I took the glass, my fingers brushing his. The contact sent a shock up my arm. Not magic. just the simple electricity of skin against skin. But it made my breath catch. I didn't know I'd choose you, Rowan continued, moving to stand by the fire. The flames painted shadows across his face, making him look older, wearier. I didn't know if I'd choose anyone. The selection is theater, a performance to satisfy tradition and keep the old families happy. I've put it off for 3 years already. My counsel was becoming insistent. So you came tonight planning to reject everyone? I sipped the whiskey, smooth and burning, nothing like the harsh liquor I'd tasted at village celebrations. I came tonight planning to endure it. His jaw tightened. To let the eligible females parade themselves. To nod politely at their father's political promises. To select someone suitable and try not to think about spending the rest of my life with a stranger chosen for bloodlines and alliances rather than... He stopped abruptly, as if he'd said more than intended. Rather than what? I prompted softly. Rowan turned to face me fully. You stood against that wall tonight trying to be invisible. I watched you for 20 minutes before I approached. Do you know what I saw? I shook my head, afraid to break whatever spell had loosened his tongue. I saw a female who'd been deliberately humiliated. The tear in your dress wasn't an accident, Elena. I could smell your cousin's satisfaction from across the room. And yet you didn't leave, didn't make a scene, didn't demand justice or revenge. His eyes held mine. You stayed because duty required it, even though staying meant enduring public shame. That's not weakness. That's strength of a kind most wolves never develop. My throat tightened. You could see all that from across the room? I've spent 15 years learning to read people. It's how you survive in my position. Knowing who's loyal, who's plotting, who's simply playing a part. He moved closer, stopping just at the edge of what would be considered proper distance. But more than that, I recognized something in you. The same thing I see in my own reflection. What's that? Loneliness. The word hung between us, simple and devastating. The kind that comes from being surrounded by people who see you as a tool, an obligation, a means to an end, never just yourself. I understood then. This wasn't romance or attraction, at least not yet. This was recognition. Two lonely souls finding unexpected mirrors in each other. You chose me because you think we're the same, I said slowly. I chose you because I think we might understand each other, Rowan corrected. Whether that's the same thing, time will tell. He gestured again toward the bathing room. Go. Change into something comfortable. We have decisions to make, and you'll think more clearly when you're not holding your dress together. He was right, of course. I nodded and moved toward the door, still wrapped in his cloak. Elena? I paused, looking back. Thank you, he said quietly, for accepting. I know this isn't what you expected from tonight. Neither is it what you expected, I think. Something that might have been a genuine smile ghosted across his lips. No, it's not. The bathing room was larger than my entire bedroom at the Ashford house. Marble and brass, with a tub big enough for 3 people and water that ran hot from actual pipes. Luxury I'd only heard about. I stripped off the ruined dress with relief, letting it fall in a sad blue puddle on the floor. For a moment I simply stood there, seeing myself in the full-length mirror. Pale skin marked with the shadows of old bruises, nothing recent. The Ashfords weren't physically cruel, but years of hard labor left their traces. My ash-blonde hair hung limp and tangled. My body was thin, too thin. Sharp angles where there should have been curves. This was what a king had chosen. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, to cry at the impossibility. Instead, I drew a bath. The hot water was heaven. I found soap that smelled like lavender and something citrus, and I scrubbed away the shame of the evening, the exhaustion of too many years bearing weight I shouldn't have had to carry. When I finally emerged, I found the clothing Rowan had mentioned. Several dresses in varying styles, all simple but well made, and more importantly, all in approximately my size. I chose the simplest, a soft gray dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline. It fit almost perfectly, comfortable and warm. There were even shoes, actual shoes that weren't worn through at the soles. When I returned to the main room, I found it transformed. A table had been set near the fire with covered dishes, and 2 chairs waited. Rowan stood by the window, his back to me, looking out at the darkness beyond. "The kitchen sent up food," he said without turning. "I thought you might be hungry. The ceremony ran long, and I doubt the Ashfords fed you well before." He was right about that too. I'd had weak tea and half a piece of bread that morning. Nothing since. My stomach growled in response to the smells wafting from the dishes. "Come," Rowan said, finally turning. His gaze swept over me in the dress, and he nodded with apparent satisfaction. "Eat. We'll talk while we do." The food was incredible. Roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables and butter, cheese, fruit. I tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but I was starving, and it was the best meal I'd had in years, probably. Rowan ate with methodical efficiency, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Tomorrow," he said, when we'd both satisfied the worst of our hunger, "the court will expect an announcement, a formal presentation of you as my chosen mate and future queen. They'll also expect explanations. I broke protocol choosing you so quickly, without the traditional courtship period. Will there be resistance?" I asked carefully. "Absolutely." He said it without hesitation, almost with dark amusement. "Your family isn't powerful enough. Your bloodline isn't distinguished enough, and you're not connected to any of the major political factions. In their eyes, you're nobody. My choosing you makes no strategic sense." The words stung, even though I'd known they were true. "Then why did you?" "Because strategy isn't everything." Rowan leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Because I'm tired of games and alliances and marriages built on calculation. Because when I looked at you tonight, I saw someone real." He paused. "And because I think you might actually survive what's coming." A chill ran down my spine. "What's coming?" "Being my queen." His expression hardened. "Make no mistake, Elena. The position comes with danger. There are wolves who'd love to see me weakened, who'd use a mate against me if they could. There are females who'll hate you for taking a place they believed was theirs by right. There are political enemies who'll test you, try to break you, hope to prove you're not strong enough. You're trying to scare me." I set down my fork, meeting his eyes, giving me a chance to back out before it's too late. "I'm being honest," he countered. "Tomorrow, when we make the formal announcement, everything changes. Tonight, you're still just Elena Ashford. Tomorrow, you become a target, a symbol, a queen-to-be, who hundreds of wolves will either try to manipulate or destroy." He leaned forward. "So yes, I'm giving you this one chance. If you want to leave, I'll arrange it. I'll say the selection was a mistake, that I was hasty. You'll face some embarrassment, but you'll be free." I thought about it. Really thought about it. The smart thing would be to leave, to take this narrow escape and return to my small, hard life, where at least I knew the dangers and how to avoid them. But then I thought about Rowan's face when he'd draped his cloak around my shoulders. The loneliness I'd recognized because it matched my own. The way he'd defended me without hesitation. Asked for my consent even when tradition said he didn't have to. And I thought about hope. That dangerous thing blooming in my chest, despite every lesson life had taught me about the cost of hoping. "I'm not leaving," I said firmly. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, definitely, but also something else. Respect, maybe. "Then we prepare you," Rowan said. "Starting tomorrow, you'll have teachers. Etiquette, politics, pack dynamics, combat." "Combat," I interrupted. "You're going to be queen of the Lycans, Elena. You need to know how to defend yourself." His tone brooked no argument. "I'll teach you myself when I can. When I can't, my personal guard will. You'll learn to fight in both forms, human and wolf." My wolf stirred at that, interested despite my human fear. She was weak, my wolf, smaller than she should be, a reflection of years of poor nutrition and suppression. But she was still there, still wanting. "I'm not strong," I admitted quietly. "My wolf is small, weak. I won't be able to fight like—" "Strength isn't just physical power," Rowan interrupted. "You survived years in a house that saw you as a burden. You endured tonight's humiliation without breaking. You're standing here now, agreeing to face a court that will try to tear you apart." He stood, moving around the table to crouch beside my chair, bringing his eyes level with mine. "That's strength, Elena. The kind that matters most. This close, I could see details I'd missed before. The faint scar through his left eyebrow, the exhaustion etched around his eyes. The loneliness still lingering despite our conversation, as if he'd carried it so long he couldn't quite believe it might lift.
"I don't want you to be like them," he said quietly. "The other royals, the alpha's mates who are all claws and dominance games, I want—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I want someone who remembers what it's like to be vulnerable, who leads with compassion because they know what cruelty costs." "You're asking me to be queen while staying weak?" I asked, confused. "I'm asking you to be queen while staying kind." He reached up slowly, telegraphing the movement, and tucked a strand of my damp hair behind my ear. The gesture was surprisingly gentle from someone I'd only ever heard described as ruthless. There's a difference. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't attraction. Not exactly, not yet, but it was something, connection, understanding, the first tentative threads of trust. "I'll try," I whispered. "That's all I ask." Rowan stood, offering me his hand. "Now come. I'll show you to your chambers. They're connected to mine, traditional for a chosen mate before the bonding ceremony, but you'll have complete privacy. A lock on your side of the connecting door. Guards I trust personally will be stationed outside." I took his hand, letting him pull me to my feet. "When is the bonding ceremony?" "Usually it happens within a week of selection." He led me through a door I hadn't noticed, into a corridor lit by softly glowing lamps. "But I'm going to invoke an old provision, a month-long courtship period to allow us to know each other before the formal mating bond. It's rarely used anymore, but it's within my rights. The court won't like that either," I guessed. "The court can adapt." His tone suggested that was the end of that discussion. My chambers were beautiful, all deep blues and silver, with a bed large enough for 3 people, and windows overlooking gardens I couldn't quite see in the darkness. A fire already burned in the fireplace, and I could see another door that must lead to the bathing room Rowan had mentioned. "Your belongings from the Ashford house will be collected tomorrow," Rowan said, standing in the doorway between our rooms. Though I suspect there isn't much. A few books, some sewing supplies, clothes that aren't worth keeping. I looked around at the luxury surrounding me. "This is more than I've ever had. It's yours now. All of it." He paused, his hand on the doorframe. "The lock works from your side only, Elena. I won't enter without permission. You have my word." "I believe you," I said, and realized I meant it. Rowan nodded, something like satisfaction crossing his features. "Good night, then. Sleep well. Tomorrow will be difficult." "Good night, Rowan." His name felt strange on my tongue, too familiar and yet somehow right. He smiled. Actually smiled. A real one that transformed his entire face from harsh to almost handsome, and stepped back into his own room, closing the door between us with a soft click. I stood there for a long moment, processing everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. This morning, I'd been nobody. Now I was a queen-to-be, standing in chambers that belonged to me, wearing a dress that fit, with a full stomach, and a future that was terrifying and impossible and somehow, against all odds, hopeful. I moved to the window, looking out at the darkened palace grounds. Somewhere out there, the Ashfords were probably still in chaos. Sienna and Vivian would be furious. My aunt would be calculating how to use this to their advantage. The other families would be gossiping, planning, trying to figure out how to exploit or eliminate this unexpected development. But here, in this room, with a lock on the door and a king who'd chosen kindness over strategy, I was safe. For tonight, at least, I was safe. I crawled into the enormous bed. The sheets were silk, softer than anything I'd ever felt, and let exhaustion pull me under. My last thought before sleep claimed me was of pale gray eyes and a cloak that had smelled like winter forests. And hope. Always that dangerous, fragile hope. Morning came too quickly, announced by a soft knock on my chamber door. I jolted awake, disoriented by the unfamiliar softness of the bed, the pale light filtering through curtains I didn't recognize. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd dreamed it all. The ceremony, the torn dress,
Rowan's cloak settling over my shoulders like a promise. Then I saw the gray dress folded neatly on a chair, and reality crashed back. "Miss Elena?" A female voice called through the door. "His Majesty sent me to help you prepare for the day." I climbed out of bed, my bare feet sinking into plush carpet. Just a moment. The woman who entered when I opened the door was older, perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes. She carried an armful of fabric and wore the midnight blue of Palace staff. "I'm Margaret," she said with a small curtsy. "I've served the royal household for 30 years. His Majesty has assigned me as your personal attendant." Her gaze swept over me with professional assessment. "We have much to do before the announcement at noon." "Noon?" My stomach dropped. "That's only a few hours, which is why we must hurry." Margaret moved with efficient grace, laying out garments on the bed. "First breakfast. Then we'll bathe you properly, do something with your hair, and get you dressed. The king wants you to look," she paused delicately, "appropriate for your new station." The next hours passed in a blur. Margaret had brought a tray laden with more food than I'd normally eat in 2 days. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread with honey, fruit, tea. She insisted I eat every bite while she prepared the bath, adding oils that made the water smell like roses. "You're too thin," she said frankly as she helped me into the tub. "But we'll fix that. Good nutrition and regular meals work wonders." Her hands were gentle as she worked through my tangled hair. "His Majesty chose well, I think." "You're not disappointed?" I asked. "That he didn't choose someone more suitable?" Margaret paused, meeting my eyes in the mirror she'd propped nearby. "I've watched King Rowan grow from a boy into the man he is. I've seen him carry burdens that would break lesser wolves, and I've never, not once in 15 years, seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you last night when he brought you to his chambers." She resumed working. "That's worth more than a dozen political alliances." Her words settled something anxious in my chest. By the time she finished, I barely recognized myself. My ash-blonde hair, properly washed and styled, fell in soft waves past my shoulders. The dress she'd brought was deep forest green, elegant but not ostentatious, with long sleeves and a neckline that suggested dignity rather than seduction. She'd even found jewelry, simple silver pieces that caught the light without screaming wealth. "Perfect," Margaret declared. "You look like a queen." I looked like someone playing dress-up, but I kept that thought to myself. A knock sounded, not from the hallway door, but from the connecting door to Rowan's chambers. "Come in," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. Rowan entered, and my breath caught. In daylight, dressed formally in black with silver fastenings, he was devastating. His dark hair was tied back, emphasizing the sharp planes of his face, and those pale eyes seemed even more intense. "Good," he said, taking in my appearance with a single sweeping glance. "You look the part." Then softer, "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," I admitted. Something pleased flickered across his expression. "The announcement will be in the throne room. The entire court will be present. Nobles, alphas from every territory, council members. They'll be hostile." I gathered that. "Some will challenge you directly. Question your worthiness, your bloodline, your strength." He moved closer, his presence commanding even in the quiet of my chambers. "You cannot show fear, Elena. Fear invites attack. I'm terrified," I said honestly. "Good. Terror means you understand the stakes." He reached out, his fingers tilting my chin up so I had to meet his eyes. "But you don't show it. You stand beside me, you keep your head high, and you remember that I chose you. That makes you queen in everything but the formal ceremony. What if they ask why you chose me?" "They will, and I'll answer." His thumb brushed my jawline, a gesture so brief I might have imagined it. "Trust me, Elena. Can you do that?" I thought about the cloak, the gentle way he'd touched my hair last night, the honesty with which he'd warned me of the dangers ahead. "Yes," I said. "Then let's introduce you to your new world." The throne room was even more imposing in daylight. High windows let in streams of pale sunlight that illuminated hundreds of wolves gathered in their finest. I recognized faces from last night.
Sienna and Vivian near the front with my aunt and uncle, their expressions carefully neutral but their eyes promising murder. Other families clustered in groups, whispering behind hands. The throne itself sat on a raised dais, carved from black oak and radiating authority. Rowan led me to it, his hand steady at the small of my back, and I understood this was deliberate. He was showing ownership, protection, claiming me before them all. "Stand here," he murmured, positioning me slightly to the right of the throne. "When I sit, you remain standing until I give you permission otherwise. It's tradition." I nodded, my mouth too dry for words. Rowan took his seat, the movement fluid and powerful, and the room fell silent. That same quality I'd noticed last night, the way his presence commanded attention without effort, filled the space. "I have called you here for a formal announcement," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly. "Last night, during the selection ceremony, I chose my mate, as is my right and duty as your king." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Some of you will question my choice. That is expected." His pale eyes swept the room with predatory focus. "But understand this. The choice is made. Elena Ashford is my chosen mate. In 1 month's time, after the traditional courtship period, she will become your queen." "Your Majesty." My uncle stepped forward, his face flushed with what he probably meant to look like concern, but read as ambition. "Forgive me, but the Ashford line, while respectable, is not— that is, we are honored, of course, but surely—" "Surely what, Lord Ashford?" Rowan's tone could have frozen fire. "You question my judgment?" My uncle paled. "No, Your Majesty, never. I simply wonder if perhaps a longer courtship, a more thorough vetting—" "Are you suggesting your own niece requires vetting?" Rowan leaned forward slightly. "That you, her guardian, have raised her so poorly that she's unfit to be queen?" It was a masterful trap. If my uncle agreed, he insulted his own household. If he disagreed, he accepted me as suitable. "Of course not, Your Majesty," my uncle stammered. "Elena is— She's standing right here," I said quietly, surprising myself, "and capable of speaking for herself." The room went utterly silent. I felt Rowan's approval like a physical touch, though his expression didn't change. "Indeed she is." Rowan gestured to me. "Elena, perhaps you'd like to address the court." My heart hammered. This was a test, for them, but also for me. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, judging, waiting for me to fail. I thought about last night, about standing against that wall in my ruined dress, choosing dignity over drama, about Rowan's words. Strength isn't just physical power. "I know what you're thinking," I said, pitching my voice to Carrie. "I'm nobody. Poor relation to a minor noble family. I have no political connections, no distinguished bloodline, no particular beauty or strength." I paused, letting the words settle. "Everything you're thinking is true." Shocked murmurs. This wasn't how these speeches usually went. "But your king chose me anyway," I continued, "not for alliances or power plays, not because I bring wealth or military advantage. He chose me because—" I glanced at Rowan, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "Because he saw something in me that he valued. And I accepted, because I saw the same in him." "Pretty words." A female voice cut through the crowd. I recognized her. Lady Celeste, a powerful alpha female from the Southern Territories. But being queen requires more than sentiment. It requires strength, dominance, the ability to lead wolves who are stronger than you. Does it? I met her challenging stare. Or does it require wisdom to know when to fight and when to lead with compassion? Does it require understanding what it means to be vulnerable so you never forget the wolves who depend on your protection? "Weakness is not wisdom," Lady Celeste spat. "Neither is cruelty," I countered. "And I've seen enough cruelty in my life to know the difference." Rowan stood, and the simple movement commanded immediate attention. "This debate is pointless. Elena is my chosen mate." "You will treat her with the respect due to your future queen. Those who cannot accept this are welcome to leave my court." No one moved. "Of course not. Leaving would be tantamount to exile." "Good."
Rowan's hand found mine, his fingers threading through mine with surprising intimacy. Then we understand each other. The formal bonding ceremony will take place 1 month from today. Until then, Elena will be learning what she needs to know. I expect your cooperation. He pulled me closer, his other hand settling possessively at my waist. For the assembled court, it was a display of claim and protection. For me, feeling the solid strength of him, it was reassurance. We're done here, Rowan announced. Court is dismissed. The crowd began to disperse, still murmuring, but the immediate threat had passed. Rowan kept his hand on my waist as he led me from the throne room, down a corridor I didn't recognize. You did well, he said once we were out of earshot. I almost vomited from fear. He actually laughed, a short, surprised sound, but you didn't. You stood there and gave them honesty instead of pretty lies. That took courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. We emerged into a courtyard garden, winter bare but beautiful in its stark lines. I need to meet with the council this afternoon. Military matters. But tonight, we'll dine together again. There's much you need to learn. About being queen. About surviving as my mate. He stopped, turning to face me fully. There are things I haven't told you yet, Elena. Dangers beyond court politics. Enemies who would use you to hurt me. His expression hardened. Before the month is out, you need to be prepared for all of it. Then teach me, I said simply. Rowan studied me for a long moment, something unreadable in his pale eyes. Then he leaned down, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to my forehead. The kiss was chaste, almost brotherly, but it sent warmth flooding through my entire body. Tonight, he promised. We begin your real education tonight. Then he was gone, striding back toward the palace with that predatory grace, leaving me standing in the winter garden with my heart racing and my mind spinning with everything that had changed, was changing, would change. Somewhere in the palace, Sienna and Vivienne were plotting. Lady Celeste was calculating, the council was debating, but here, in this moment, with the ghost of Rowan's kiss still warm on my skin, I felt something I'd never expected. I felt ready. The education Rowan promised began that very evening, but not in the way I expected. Instead of etiquette lessons or political briefings, he took me to the training grounds behind the palace, a vast open space marked with fighting rings and obstacle courses, empty now in the gathering dusk. You need to shift, he said without preamble. When was the last time you let your wolf out? I wrapped my arms around myself against the cold wind. 2 years, maybe 3. His expression darkened. That long? Elena? Suppressing your wolf that severely, you could have damaged the bond permanently. The Ashfords didn't like me shifting. Said I was too weak. That I made the pack look bad. The old shame crept up my throat. They weren't wrong. My wolf is small. Smaller than she should be. Show me. It wasn't a request. Shifting in front of him meant revealing the most vulnerable part of myself, the physical proof of every inadequacy I carried. But he was watching me with those pale, patient eyes, and I remembered his words from last night. I want someone who remembers what it's like to be vulnerable. I closed my eyes and reached for the place inside where my wolf waited. She stirred immediately, eager despite years of suppression, and I let her rise. The shift hurt more than it should have. Pain lanced through my bones as they reformed, and when it finished, I stood on 4 legs feeling exposed and small. My wolf form was indeed undersized, barely larger than a normal wolf when I should have been massive like other Lycans. My coat was pale ash, almost white, and I could feel how thin I was even in this form. I kept my eyes down, waiting for disappointment. Instead, I heard Rowan's sharp intake of breath. Elena, look at me. I raised my head reluctantly. He'd shifted too, and his wolf was magnificent. Massive and midnight black, with those same pale gray eyes that seemed even more striking in his wolf face. He was easily 3 times my size, all power and lethal grace, but he wasn't looking at me with disgust. He was looking at me with something like wonder. You're beautiful.
His voice echoed in my mind, the pack bond that allowed shifted wolves to communicate. Like moonlight given form, I huffed in disbelief. I'm half the size I should be, weak. You're alive. He moved closer, his movements careful, non-threatening. After years of suppression and poor nutrition, after being told you were worthless, you're alive and your wolf survived. That's not weakness, Elena. That's resilience. His muzzle brushed my shoulder, a gesture of comfort and acceptance. My wolf responded instinctively, leaning into the touch, starved for connection she'd been denied for so long. Run with me, Rowan said. Let her stretch. Let her remember what it means to be free. Then he was off, a black shadow streaking across the training grounds toward the tree line beyond. My wolf didn't hesitate. She bolted after him, legs pumping, lungs burning in the best way. We ran through winter bare forest, over frozen ground and between skeletal trees. I couldn't keep up with Rowan's pace, but he adjusted for me, circling back when I fell too far behind, encouraging me onward. My wolf sang with joy, with the simple pleasure of movement and cold air and the presence of another wolf who didn't judge her inadequacy. By the time we returned to the training grounds, my legs trembled with exhaustion and my lungs ached, but I felt more alive than I had in years. We shifted back, Rowan with fluid ease, me with that same painful struggle, and he was there immediately, wrapping his cloak around my shoulders before the cold could bite too deep. Your wolf is strong, he said firmly. With proper nutrition and regular shifting, she'll grow. You'll both grow stronger. She's still too small to fight, I said, my breathing still ragged. Size isn't everything in combat. Rowan's hand settled at the small of my back, guiding me back toward the palace. Speed, strategy, willingness to use unconventional tactics. These matter more than brute strength. I'll teach you. Why are you doing this? The question escaped before I could stop it. Training me personally, being patient, actually caring whether I succeed or fail. He stopped walking, turning to face me in the twilight. Because I chose you, and I don't make choices lightly. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone. Because I see potential in you that you've never been allowed to develop. And because... He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering across his features. Because? I prompted softly. Because I'm tired of being alone, he said finally. And I think you are too. The honesty in those words stole my breath. This powerful king, this legendary warrior, he was as lonely as I was, maybe more, because at least I'd never had expectations to live up to. I am, I whispered. So tired of it. Rowan leaned down slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, and pressed his forehead to mine. We stood like that for a long moment, breathing together, sharing warmth and something deeper than attraction. Understanding. Recognition. The first fragile threads of genuine connection. Come, he said eventually, his voice rougher than usual. You need food and rest. Tomorrow, your formal training begins. The next 2 weeks passed in an exhausting blur. My days started before dawn with Margaret waking me for breakfast. Real, substantial meals that slowly began to ease the hollow feeling I'd carried for years. Then came lessons. Etiquette with a stern older woman named Beatrice, who corrected every gesture, every word, every expression until I wanted to scream. Political history with a scholar who spoke in monotone about pack dynamics and territorial disputes. Economics with the royal treasurer, who seemed perpetually disappointed by my lack of mathematical expertise. But the afternoons belonged to combat training, and those hours I actually enjoyed. Rowan taught me himself when his duties allowed, and when they didn't. His personal guard took over, a massive male named Devon, with scars crossing his face and surprising patience. They taught me how to use my size as an advantage, how to fight dirty when necessary, how to shift faster despite the pain. You'll never overpower a larger opponent, Devon explained during one session, demonstrating a move that used momentum against itself. So you outthink them. Strike fast, strike precisely, and get out before they can retaliate. My body ached constantly from the training, but it was good pain. Pain that meant growth, strength building where there'd been only weakness. The evenings I spent with Rowan, sometimes over dinner, sometimes walking the palace grounds.
sometimes simply sitting by the fire in his chambers while he worked through documents, and I read from his extensive library. We talked about everything. His childhood as the only heir to a powerful lineage, the weight of expectations he'd carried from birth. My years with the Ashfords, the small kindnesses I'd clung to amid the cruelty. We were learning each other, piece by piece, building something that felt less like a political arrangement and more like partnership. But the court remained hostile. Lady Celeste challenged me publicly twice more, once questioning my knowledge of pack law. I'd stumbled but recovered. Once suggesting I was manipulating the king with feminine wiles. Rowan had shut that down with icy precision. The Ashfords walked a careful line, trying to curry favor while distancing themselves from their former treatment of me. Other noble families watched and waited, looking for weakness to exploit. And then there were my cousins. Sienna and Vivian had taken up residence at the palace. Their family's status gave them that right. And they made their presence felt. Subtle sabotage. Books I needed for lessons mysteriously misplaced. Gossip spread about my inadequacies. Pointed comments whenever we crossed paths in hallways. "Still playing dress-up, cousin?" Sienna said sweetly one afternoon, intercepting me on my way to weapons training. She wore gold silk that probably cost more than I'd earned in a year of sewing. "It must be exhausting, pretending to be something you're not." "I'm not pretending," I said evenly, trying to step around her. Vivian blocked my path. "Aren't you?" Poor little Elena, lifted from obscurity by the king's momentary pity. "Do you really think this will last?" Her smile was poisonous. "He'll tire of you eventually, and when he does, you'll have nowhere to go. We made sure of that. Told everyone in the family how you manipulated your way into his bed." Ice flooded my veins. "I've done no such thing. Does the truth matter?" Sienna examined her nails. "Perception is reality at court, cousin. And we've been very busy shaping perceptions." They swept past me, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and casual malice in their wake. I stood there for a long moment, hands clenched into fists, trying to steady my breathing. They were lying. Rowan and I hadn't even kissed properly yet, let alone anything more, but lies repeated often enough became truth in places like this. I needed to tell Rowan. He'd said to trust him, that he'd protect me. But I also needed to prove I could handle this myself, that I wasn't just another burden for him to carry. So I went to weapons training and channeled my anger into each strike, each block, each movement until Devon called a halt. "Good," he said with rare approval. "You're finally fighting like you mean it." That evening, over dinner in Rowan's private chambers, he studied me with those two perceptive eyes. "Something happened today," he said. Not a question. I debated lying, then remembered what he'd said about honesty. "My cousins. They're spreading rumors that I couldn't quite say it. That you're my mistress rather than my chosen mate." Rowan's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I'm aware. Lady Celeste made certain to inform me during the council meeting, suggesting it reflected poorly on my judgment. I'm sorry. Don't." He set down his fork. "Don't apologize for their cruelty, Elena. And don't think for a moment I blame you." He leaned back, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "I've been too gentle, trying to let the court adjust, giving them time to accept you, but they see gentleness as weakness. What will you do?" "Make a statement." His pale eyes met mine, one they can't misinterpret or twist. "But I need your consent first." My heart rate picked up. "What kind of statement?" Rowan stood, moving around the table to crouch beside my chair like he had that first night, bringing himself to my eye level, making himself less imposing. "The bonding ceremony is 2 weeks away," he said carefully. "But there's a tradition, an older one, rarely used now, where the king can formally claim his chosen mate before the full ceremony. A public declaration that makes the bond, not complete, but acknowledged. Binding in ways that matter to pack law." "What does it involve?" "A bite." His hand came up to trace my pulse point, the touch feather light. "Here, where everyone can see it. My mark on you, claiming you as mine before the pack and the ancestors." He paused. "It would mean sharing some of my strength through the partial bond. You'd heal faster, grow stronger. Your wolf would benefit from the connection to mine. But," I sensed there was more, "but it's intimate.
Not sexual, but intense. And public. I'd do it before the entire court, making it impossible for anyone to question your status. His eyes searched mine. I won't do it without your full consent, Elena. This is your choice. I thought about Sienna and Vivian's poisonous smiles, about Lady Celeste's challenges, about 2 more weeks of gossip and sabotage before the formal ceremony that would finally cement my position. Or I could end it now. Let Rowan mark me, claim me, make it undeniable. When? I asked. Something fierce and pleased flashed across his face. Tomorrow night. I'll call a court assembly. His hand slid to cup my jaw. Are you certain? Yes. And I was. Not because I was in love with him, not yet, though I could feel something building between us, slow and inevitable. But because I trusted him, because he'd kept every promise, because he saw me as a partner, not a possession. Then tomorrow, Rowan said softly, you become mine in truth. He leaned in and kissed me, not my forehead this time, but my lips. It was gentle, questioning, nothing demanding. His mouth was warm and careful, and when he pulled back, I found myself leaning after him. Tomorrow, I echoed, my voice unsteady. His smile was small, but genuine. Rest well, my queen. You'll need your strength. The court assembly was called for sunset. A deliberate choice, Rowan explained, because twilight held power in Lycan tradition. The space between day and night, when the veil between worlds grew thin, and bonds forged held deeper magic. Margaret dressed me in white, another deliberate choice. Pure, unmarked, waiting to be claimed. The gown was simple but elegant, with a high collar that left my throat exposed and hair swept up to bare my neck completely. She worked in unusual silence, her hands gentle but her expression troubled. You don't approve, I said finally. She paused in fastening a silver clasp. It's not my place to approve or disapprove, Miss Elena, but you have an opinion. Margaret met my eyes in the mirror. The claiming bite. It's not something done lightly. Once marked, you'll carry part of the king's power. His strength, but also his burdens. His enemies will feel your presence through the partial bond and know you're protected, but they'll also know hurting you hurts him. She touched my shoulder carefully. I just want to be certain you understand what you're accepting. I do. I covered her hand with mine. I know it's fast. I know by all logic this is insane. But Margaret, I trust him. And I'm tired of being afraid. Her expression softened. Then you're braver than most, child. The king chose well. A knock at the door. Not Rowan, but Devon, his scarred face serious. It's time, he said. The court is assembled. His Majesty is waiting. My stomach flipped, but I stood, smoothing down the white dress. Margaret pressed something into my hand. A small cloth sachet that smelled of lavender. For courage, she whispered. Not that you need it. I squeezed her hand in thanks, then followed Devon through corridors that seemed longer than usual, each step bringing me closer to a moment that would change everything. The throne room had been transformed. Candles burned everywhere, hundreds of them, casting dancing shadows across the assembled wolves. The crowd was larger than at the announcement. Every noble family present, every alpha and their mates, council members, guards, servants. They lined the walls and filled the floor space, creating an aisle down the center that led to the dais where Rowan waited. He wore ceremonial black, his hair unbound and falling past his shoulders, and even from a distance I could feel the weight of his power pressing against my skin. But it was his eyes that held me, pale gray and intense, tracking my approach with predatory focus. The crowd parted as I walked. I heard whispers, felt their stares, but I kept my gaze locked on Rowan. One step, another, closer. When I reached the dais, he descended to meet me, and the whispers died. Elena Ashford. His voice carried through the chamber with that resonant quality that demanded attention. You stand before this court, before our pack, before the ancestors themselves. Do you come here of your own free will? I do. My voice didn't shake. Small victory. Do you understand what it means to accept my claim? To bear my mark and share my strength? I understand. Then kneel. I sank to my knees on the cold stone, the white dress pooling around me. Rowan circled behind me, and I felt his presence like heat against my back. His fingers touched my neck, finding the pulse point, the perfect place for a claiming bite. "This bond," he said, louder now for the court, "is witnessed and acknowledged. From this moment, Elena is under my protection. Any who harm her answer to me. Any who insult her insult their king." His fingers pressed slightly harder. "She is mine, my chosen mate, my future queen." Then he leaned down, his breath warm against my skin, and his voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. "Trust me?" "Always," I breathed. His teeth grazed my neck, a warning, a promise, and then he bit down. Pain exploded through me, white-hot and all-consuming. I gasped, my hands clutching at my dress, trying not to cry out. But beneath the pain, something else surged, power, wild and ancient, flooding into me through the wound. Rowan's strength, his dominance, the sheer force of him pouring through the partial bond now forming between us. My wolf rose with a howl of recognition, no longer small or weak, but blazing with borrowed power. I could feel Rowan in my mind, his presence settling like a foundation I'd been missing my entire life. Strong, steady, protective. "I have you." His voice echoed through the bond. "You're safe. You're mine." The bite released, and Rowan's tongue swept over the wound, sealing it, marking it, making it permanent. When he stepped back, I felt the absence of his touch like a physical loss. "Rise," he commanded. "Rise and face your pack as my claimed mate." I stood on shaking legs, and Margaret had been right. I could already feel the difference, strength flowing through muscles that had always been weak, my vision sharper, my senses more acute, the partial bond humming beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. Rowan took my hand, turning me to face the court. On my neck, I knew the mark blazed red and unmistakable. His bite, his claim, visible to every wolf in the room, the silence stretched. Then, slowly, wolves began to kneel. Not everyone. Lady Celeste remained standing, her expression murderous, and I saw Sienna and Vivian rigid with fury. But enough. More than half the court dropped to one knee, heads bowed in acknowledgement. "Your queen," Rowan said simply. "Acknowledge her." "Long live the queen," the kneeling wolves murmured, then louder. "Long live Queen Elena." The sound washed over me, and something in my chest, something that had been broken for so long I'd forgotten it could heal, began to mend. The celebration that followed was more ordeal than pleasure. Wolves approached to offer congratulations that ranged from genuine to barely concealed hostility. I stood beside Rowan, his hand never leaving my waist, learning to smile and nod and deflect pointed comments with the diplomatic phrases Beatrice had drilled into me. But I could feel him through the bond now. His satisfaction when I handled a challenge well. His anger when someone overstepped. His constant awareness of my energy levels and emotional state. It was intimate in a way I hadn't expected. The sharing of sensation and feeling. "You're exhausted." His voice touched my mind, private and concerned. "I can last longer," I insisted. "You don't have to." His thumb stroked my waist. "We've made our statement. The rest is just theater." He was right. The mark on my neck had done its job. No one could question my status now. But I wanted to finish this, to prove I could endure. Then Sienna appeared, her beautiful face twisted with barely controlled rage. "Cousin," she said with false sweetness. "Congratulations on your elevation. Though I suppose sleeping your way to the top is one strategy." The nearby wolves went silent, shocked by the open insult. I felt Rowan tense beside me, fury spiking through the bond. But this was mine to handle. I'd let them push me around for too long. "Careful, Sienna," I said softly. "Insulting the king's mate is insulting the king himself, and he's standing right here." I tilted my head, exposing the claiming mark deliberately. "But please continue. I'm curious how far your stupidity extends." Her face flushed red. "You think you're safe now? Protected? You're still the same pathetic—" "Enough!" Rowan's voice cut through her words like a blade. "You will address your queen with respect, or you will leave this court, permanently." Sienna's mouth snapped shut, her eyes wide with genuine fear. She'd gone too far and knew it. "Apologize," Rowan continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Now. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then self-preservation won over pride. My apologies, Your Majesty, my queen. The words tasted like poison in her mouth, but she said them. Accepted, I said graciously. Now leave. Your presence offends me. Sienna fled, Vivian hurrying after her, and I felt savage satisfaction through the bond. Not from me, but from Rowan. Well done, he said privately, though I'd have preferred to exile her entirely. Baby steps, I replied, surprising myself with the humor. Let her dig her own grave. His hand squeezed my waist in approval. We finally escaped the celebration near midnight. Rowan led me not to my chambers, but to his, through the connecting door I'd never used, into his private space that smelled like him, wood smoke and winter, and something uniquely masculine. Sit, he ordered gently, guiding me to a chair by the fire. You need food and rest. The claiming takes a toll. He was right. Exhaustion dragged at me now that the adrenaline had faded, but it was good exhaustion, earned exhaustion. Rowan brought cheese and bread and wine, sitting across from me while I ate. Through the bond, I felt his contentment, his satisfaction at having me here, marked and claimed, finally truly his. What happens now? I asked between bites. Now you rest. Tomorrow, your real education as queen begins, not just lessons, but actual duties. You'll sit in on council meetings, handle petitions, learn the reality of leadership. He paused. And in 2 weeks, we'll complete the bond with the full ceremony. Will it hurt like this did? I touched the mark on my neck, which still throbbed. No. The full bonding is different. More intense, but not painful. His eyes darkened slightly. More intimate. Heat crept up my cheeks. We'd been so focused on politics and survival that I'd barely thought about the physical reality of becoming his mate. Don't worry, Rowan said softly, clearly reading my expression. We'll take it slowly. I have no interest in claiming a wife who fears me. He stood, offering me his hand. Come. You should sleep in your own chambers tonight. Your body needs to adjust to the partial bond. I let him lead me to the connecting door, but paused on the threshold. Rowan? Yes, thank you. For choosing me, for protecting me, for everything. He stepped closer, his hand cupping my marked neck with careful reverence. Thank you for accepting, for trusting me when you had no reason to. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. Sleep well, my queen. Tomorrow, we face the world together. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Rowan brought me into every aspect of ruling. Council meetings where I learned the delicate balance of pack politics, petitions where I practiced mediating disputes, even military briefings where Devon began teaching me strategy alongside combat. The claiming mark changed everything. Wolves who'd dismissed me before now treated me with wary respect. The bond with Rowan deepened daily. I could feel his moods, his location, his general state of health, and he could feel mine, which meant he always knew when I was overwhelmed or scared or angry. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like finally having someone on my side. Sienna and Vivian kept their distance after that night, though I occasionally caught them watching me with undisguised hatred. Lady Celeste made one more challenge, questioning my judgment during a council meeting, but I'd learned enough by then to defend my position with facts and logic. She backed down, though her expression promised this wasn't over. But mostly, I was learning what it meant to be queen, not the ceremonial aspects, though those mattered, but the real work of caring for a pack. Listening to their concerns, solving their problems, being present in a way that mattered. And slowly, impossibly, I was falling in love with the male who'd chosen me. It happened in small moments. Rowan's hand finding mine during a difficult meeting. The way he smiled, really smiled, when I said something that surprised him. How he'd pull me into sparring matches and laugh when I managed to land a hit. The late-night conversations where we shared our deepest fears and hopes. The bond amplified it. Let me feel his growing affection matching my own. But the feelings were real, built on respect and trust and genuine partnership. On the eve of our bonding ceremony, Rowan found me in the palace gardens where winter was finally releasing its grip. Early flowers pushed through the thawing earth, stubborn and beautiful. "Nervous?" he asked, settling beside me on the stone bench. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if the complete bond shows you everything I am, and you realize you made a mistake?" Rowan turned me to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Elena, I've felt you through the partial bond for 2 weeks. I know your fears, your doubts, your insecurities, and I've also felt your strength, your compassion, your fierce determination to be worthy." He smiled. "You're exactly who I need, who I want. No doubts." "I love you," I blurted out, unable to hold it back any longer. "I know it's fast and probably stupid and—" He kissed me. Really kissed me this time, deep and claiming and full of promise. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes blazed with emotion. "I love you too," he said fiercely. "My brave, stubborn, impossible queen. Tomorrow, I'll bond with you completely, and every day after, I'll choose you again." The bonding ceremony was private. Just us, the pack elders, and a handful of trusted witnesses. In the old temple beneath the palace, surrounded by candles and ancient carvings, I pledged myself to Rowan and he to me. The complete bond formed in a rush of sensation, his soul touching mine, our wolves recognizing each other as mates, power and emotion flowing both ways until I couldn't tell where I ended, and he began. When it was done, I was no longer just Elena. I was queen, his mate, his partner in truth, and I was finally, completely, home. 5 years later, I stood on the balcony overlooking the palace grounds, watching Rowan spar with Devon in the training yard below. 5 years as queen had changed me. I was stronger now, confident in ways I'd never imagined possible. My wolf had grown, fed by the bond and proper care, until she was nearly as large as she should have been all along. But more than physical changes, I'd found my purpose. The court respected me now. Even Lady Celeste had become, if not a friend, at least an ally. I'd implemented programs to help low-born wolves like I'd been, ensuring no child went hungry or untrained. I'd mediated disputes between territories and strengthened alliances through diplomacy rather than force. And I'd done it all with Rowan beside me, his strength supporting mine, our bond deeper and more complex with each passing year. "Your Majesty?" Margaret appeared in the doorway, her silver hair now fully white, but her smile as warm as ever. "The delegation from the Eastern Territories has arrived, and—" She paused, her eyes twinkling. "The healer confirms what you suspected." My hand moved instinctively to my still flat stomach. "You're certain?" "Quite certain. Congratulations, my queen. The kingdom will have an heir by winter." Joy and terror warred in my chest. A child. Rowan's child. The next generation of our pack. Through the bond, I felt Rowan's sudden attention. He'd sensed my emotional spike. He looked up at the balcony, and even from this distance, I saw the question in his eyes. I smiled and nodded, one hand still pressed to my stomach. His whoop of joy echoed across the training yard, and then he was running, actually running, toward the palace. I met him at the base of the stairs, and he swept me into his arms, spinning me with careful exuberance. "A child?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "A child," I confirmed. He set me down gently, his hands framing my face, and kissed me with a tenderness that still made my heart race after 5 years of marriage. "I love you," he whispered against my lips. "My queen. My mate. My everything. And I love you," I replied. "My king. My partner. My home." Around us, the palace came alive with celebration as word spread. But in that moment, holding each other while our child grew between us and our bond hummed with shared joy, we were simply Elena and Rowan, two lonely souls who'd found each other in a crowd and built something beautiful from broken pieces. And we were finally, completely, perfectly whole.